this works. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jan Meij. I'm an associate professor of sociology in the Department of Justice Studies, and I serve as this year's director of the Office of Public Policy Events. This is our second event. Some of you were here in September when we had Dr. Nolan Higdon talk to us about how to have the process of civil discourse and a really big focus on critical media literacy. So there's three parts to what we have for you. The first part is I'm going to try to keep it at 20 minutes, just a general overview of the election. I'm going to talk to Mr. Tommy Dole, our supervisor of election, and then we're going to have a fantastic panel. Liberty Barber is a student in Dr. John Ruff's class that all semester focused on the question, how do we facilitate difficult conversations on religion and politics? Unfortunately, I think we have an absent panel member, but Ron Sidman is here. He's a community member, former business owner, right? He's a very active participant in the Socrates Cafe, which is another endeavor where these kind of civil conversations on difficult topics occur. And we have some community members there, students, faculty, staff. So if you're interested in these kind of events, definitely reach out to Peter right here. He is the coordinator of the Socrates Cafe, and right there. So, all right. We're going to use poll everywhere. If you have questions, thoughts, comments throughout the event, please send them there. If you see me stare at my computer, that's what I'm looking at. I'm not doing Instagram. I'm actually looking at your questions. And I think, audience questions are always better. There we go. So this overview. My goal is not to say, America did awesome on November 5th, or America did horrific. I'm sure there's a range of emotions in the room. Some of us are excited, some of us are depressed. And so the focus really is on how can we understand what was the signal that we got from the American voters? What kind of direction are we going to go into? And really with the mindset, because next week, right, many of us are going to be traveling. We're going to be seeing loved ones who likely vote differently than you and I vote. And how do we move forward? How do we have these types of difficult conversations, and what do we see in that? So I wanted to start with, as an educator, this is, I think, part of the challenge we have as a country. Whatever we do in terms of voter outreach, voter education, we may have to rethink some of that. On the slide, you will see two surges on election day. On November 5th, a significant amount of Americans Googled, is Joe Biden running for president? Who is running for president? After the election, we saw an increase in, how do I change my vote? And so it's, and if you Google it, you will see tons of videos, you will see lots of coverage on that question. But clearly, that is one of the first things we have to address. The other thing is, despite all the noise about how this was the most important election of our lifetime, 1 in 3 eligible voters stayed home. And this is not unique. In 2020, we had a success. But, we're in academia. I mean, this is not even a C, right? 66%, a D plus is what we typically see in voter turnout. And there's, of course, differences. We in Lee County had, I believe, 80%? 81%. So Lee County actually outperformed the country. You can see in some of the swing states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, was about 70%. But that still means that in Pennsylvania, which according to many people on the left, many people on the right said, that is where the election will be decided. 3 in 10 people in Pennsylvania decided to stay home. And I think this is one of the takeaway points for me that I encourage us to look at. You have a question?
Yeah, so already I have a question. So I see that we had a 64% turnout rate of voting sure Tommy is going to correct me, of our registered voters, Tommy, not the eligible population. So it's like an apples to oranges comparison.
No, the registered voters. Yeah.
I think that's what he means.
Yeah.
Perhaps as elderly voters.
Well, voting eligible is different than registered voters, is it not? Is that not a difference?
Well, eligible voters means registered,
It doesn't mean
Yeah.
registered? Okay, thank you.
at least in my understanding. But that's actually a really good question to look into.
Sorry, really quick logistical. If you're going to speak from the audience, we're going to need you to speak from a microphone so we can pick you up on the video recording tonight. So,
That's part of the benefit also of submitting it electronically. But yeah. All right. So, oh. The thing I want to say about this is you see a lot of analyses in the media. Which groups do we blame? Which groups do we thank for this election result? And just from a data literacy perspective, we got to stop comparing percentages to percentages, right? We got to look at the actual absolute numbers. The other thing is, because 1 in 3 Americans stayed home, right? We got to explore, well, what are the reasons? Do they not feel represented? Do they perhaps not have an opportunity to vote? Did they not get time off from work? And so that's one of the things to look at. All right, lots of data on here. Essentially, a lot of facts that people spout. They say like, money wins the elections. The Democrats outspent the Republicans by a significant margin. Third party was not really a spoiler. If you look at the turnout, Trump gained about 2.2 million votes. Harris lost about 9 million compared to what Biden had. So all in all, we had 7 million fewer votes. A few of the just exit polling, what concerned Americans? 7 out of 10 Americans thought the economy was not so good or poor. The threatened the state of democracy, 7 out of 10 Americans said that. But I want you to take a look at the party breakdown. The conversations we're having, and this is why it's so important to reach across the aisle, is important. Most Americans, at least, made the decision October. And then finally, I want you to also think about the stereotypes we have about why people vote for particular candidates. Cares about people like me, has good judgment. Look at the party breakdown of that. It doesn't fit the stereotype. I'm not going to be speaking a lot about gender and race. Yes, there was a swing, but I want you to pay attention to something that also needs to be in the analysis. 7 out of 10 voters that showed up earned $50,000 or more. And if you look at the households that earn over $100,000 or more, a slight majority went for Harris. For the incomes under $100,000, a slight majority went for Trump. The conversations we're having about, who people vote for aren't really represented. This is the one where I think we need to spend a lot more attention on. Let's see if we're going to do this. I mentioned the name Joe Rogan. Let's see what the... That's usually the reaction I get. Some are rolling their eyes and others are like, yes, Joe Rogan. The most significant demographic shift is in age. And I want you to also think about the analysis, right? So Kamala Harris, non-white woman, right? If that played a role, she wouldn't have gained among the older voting population and lost among the younger population, right? Stereotypically speaking, younger people would be more likely to look at that. But there's comments like that. I voted for Trump because he went on Joe Rogan. And just like Dr. Nolan Hickman mentioned in September, we got to stop looking at corporate media sources. We got to look at independent news sources from across the political aisle. Joe Rogan, whether you like him or not, has a bigger audience than Fox News or CNN. He is mainstream news. I will single out 2 other podcasts here. Lex Fridman, Theo Vaughn, highly popular podcasts. Trump went on those podcasts. J.D. Vance went on those podcasts. The only Democrat that does that is Bernie Sanders, and he got critiqued when he went on those. But this is how young people and a lot of Americans get their news, from these podcasts. And some of these are more outspoken right-wing, but many are not necessarily that way. There is a podcast group on the left. The audience is much smaller, and Democratic politicians don't really engage with that. So I'm not going to say if Kamala Harris went on Joe Rogan, the result would have been different, but not engaging with what a growing number of Americans communicates with seems a bit short-sighted. These are more critical pieces, but since we had him as a guest speaker, Dr. Higdon published 2 pieces. First, he talked about the podcast phenomenon. 4 days before the election, he predicted that this would happen. And then afterwards, he talked about how Democratic-leaning media really misinformed their base and ignored certain stories. And so again, when we get to the later part of this event, this is why it's so important to talk across the aisle. Because there are crucial differences. I'm not going to go through all of these. These come from Pew Research Center, a fantastic source. Highly recommend for that. But as you can see, on all these cultural issues, on all these sides and scope of the government, there is a fundamental difference between people that support Trump and the people that support Harris. Without engaging with these other side, we're not going to fix that. I do want to point out, again, why through these conversations you will see misrepresentation perhaps denied. The gains women have made in society have come at the expense of men. If you read the corporate media sources, that was a #1 topic. But if you look at the data, let's round it up. 7 out of 10 Republicans do not agree with that statement. That actually is the one where there's very little partisan bias or difference on. Raise your hand if you believe AOC, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, and Donald J. Trump are the same politically. Right. They couldn't be more further apart, right? But she did something. And if you look throughout the map, you will see this. There were, in states that voted for Trump, they also elected progressive people in the Senate, progressive members in the House. Abortion was codified in deep Republican states like Montana and Missouri. Florida got majority to support that. AOC asked this question. She noticed that people that voted for her also voted for Trump. And she didn't say, how dare you? She asked the question, why? And here are some of the responses. I think for any sort of post-election analysis, more people need to look into that question. She did actually what I encourage people to do. She reached across. I'm going to skip this. We notice immigration, abortion, the economy were the big issues. Here's the other thing too. Regardless of what we think we did, regardless of whether this is right or wrong, this is what American voters perceive. And if you look at the people, the American voters from both, whether they voted for him or against him, they overall said Donald Trump did a better job explaining his policies than Kamala Harris. And again, I know people are going to say there's all sorts of evidence counter to that. This is the reality of the American public. These are the facts that we have to deal with. We'll skip this, but essentially it's not the stereotype that you hear about whose policies are going to positively and negatively impact each other. But this is the one I really want to end with. That actually gives me hope. If you look at this question, roughly 9 out of 10 Americans want the president to be a president for all Americans, even if it means disappointing their base. That means that 86% of Trump supporters are fine if he does things that benefit the country, but don't benefit the people that, or are along with what he wants. The same with Harris. That's the real America that, that isn't as polarized, perhaps. So I'm going to end with a couple of thoughts, and that is focus on the facts. You hear all sorts of stories about people that are nominated for positions. There's a process. They have to be confirmed by the Senate. And if you engage in independent news sources, you will see that there is bipartisan discussion about that. If the Senate doesn't confirm it, there has to be a recess appointment. There's a lot of people saying that that's going to happen. There's a process for that to take in. Changing the Constitution requires a 2/3 supermajority in Congress. Requires 2/3 of state legislatures to vote for that. So focus on what is actually in bills, in proposed policies. The other thing too is we had Stop the Steal. There's very little attention to this in the media, it seems. But in 2020, there was the Stop the Steal movement, the belief that the election was stolen. We now have an increasing number of people on the left that are, and they call themselves blue and none, and they're basically saying that the election was rigged. Because what happened to those 20 million votes that suddenly came out more? In short, that's kind of some of the data we've seen from the election. Now let me look at this to see if people have put questions in. Come on. Okay.
I was gonna say the blue anon thing is real. I mean, they're not totally wrong. I mean, just in Georgia alone, there were 60 bomb threats, basically to reduce turnout in all Democratic areas, for example. And there's, I think on election night there was, I think it was like multiple hundreds in different states of bomb threats, for example, to reduce turnout. And nobody's talking about that. It's kind of like, it reminds me of when they talk about Trump, they always avoid the actual like stuff. The media never talks about what the real, like, for example, like a week before the election, there was literally tape of Epstein saying that Trump and Epstein used to literally do like a sexual battle of like young women. Nobody talked about that a week before the election. And it's the same thing about this every day. We don't talk about the real actual causes. And then you wonder why people are so fucking pissed.
I mean, I will say to that there's a lot of anger. There's actually an interesting question coming in here. What is the line between complacency and civility when dealing with those you disagree with politically? It's a very good question. My wife tells me this all the time. Pick your battles, right? If you are going, I'm gonna plagiarize what Dr. Higdon said in September. You're going to go to your family next week. You're not going to fix immigration over Thanksgiving dinner. It's not going to happen. It's too complex of an issue. But here's the question for it: is like, do you want the relationship with those people? Or do you want to, have those arguments? Give people an opportunity. For example, right? You say, well, the border needs to be more secure. We can call that person immediately a racist, xenophobic, or we can have a conversation. Now, if they start spouting off racist stuff, then maybe it's time, okay. But then that person's not engaging in civility. But you will be surprised. I see a lot of people that were surprised on November 5th. If you actually talk to people that supported Trump and supported Harris, none of this was surprising. If you listen to those podcasts on both the right and the left, none of this was surprising. And that's because people are talking about those things. So, yeah, that's what I would say on that. Is there any reason to believe that American democracy can withstand Trumpism in these 4 years? So this is one of those questions that we can't answer. I can give you a very sensationalist answer. I can say he's going to be the savior of American democracy or he's going to destroy American democracy. We don't know. But a lot of the things that people are worried about have a process. Like, you know, people say, can he run for a third term? No, he can't. There's an entire process. So I would suggest, is to wait until those things become real. And, you know, some people will say that whatever he does is good and whatever that he doesn't do is bad. All right. So part of the reason I wanted Mr. Doyle to join us is because of those slides that I showed in the beginning, right? People Googling. Like, I don't even understand how you didn't know who was running for president. It was everywhere. There was signs. There were, I got a sample ballot. It was in the news. So please welcome Mr. Doyle. And you can come sit here. And I've got some questions, but I'm sure you have better questions. So just submit them here if you have those. I'm going to put this on. This on. All right. So, what exactly is a supervisor of elections?
Well, it's an elected constitutional officer, and his duties is to, as an executive officer, is to lead a team of departments that comply with the Florida Election Code. Everything we do as a supervisor of election is in state statute. The only thing we have flexibility in is how much we pay our staff, who we hire, who we fire, the type of equipment we buy, how we develop our budgets, and how we spend that money. In Lee County, supervised elections conduct elections for all the municipalities, all 6, I think it is, and our main goal is to register voters, educate voters, and we do that through our community education service department that go out, and which Paula, you saw out there, is part of that. Oh, there she is, back there. We have about 20 part-time, we call them patriots, that go out almost every single day to register voters. And during that registration, there is some education going on. They will tell you how things work. We, just like we accepted some vote by mail requests. We have to process those. They come in by mail, they come in through web requests, they come in by phone calls. This past election, it was like, I sent out very early, I sent out 500,000 information mailers that told people that your request for vote by mail has expired, please request. Well, I think by getting closer to the election, we still had under 100,000, and in the last 2 months of that election, we had 90,000 requests. I was trying to get people to do it earlier so we wouldn't have that windfall of people coming in, because it takes time to request those things and process them through the department. We are by statute, we do list maintenance every year. And list maintenance is actually it's done daily, but we have these huge list maintenance that we have to do every year, where we get a report from the National Change of Address Association that shows every person in our county who has moved, and we process those one by one, it's a very laborious thing that go through. Our voter registration department has about 12 people that work for them. They work at the branch offices and at the main office, and they process each one of those. People who have moved within the county, people who have moved out of the county and out of state. And that creates a lot of mailings. When we find a person that possibly is not eligible to vote, they are mailed information that, are you still at this address? And that's non-forwardable. And if it comes back, and then they are sent a final address confirmation, if that we never hear from them, because that is forwardable, then they are put on an inactive list. When you're put on, yes?
Okay, so this is really interesting, and I always learn something every time I hear you speak. Sorry about that. So this is really very interesting hearing a little bit about this process, because we know that a lot of young people, we have a lot of increased mobility in the community. I mean, when we look around, there's literally a multi-residential apartment building cropping up like mushrooms after a summer rain. And so what I'm hearing is that when you receive a change of address from the post office, right? It's not like a citizen is reaching out saying,
Right.
I've moved.
Yes.
Right? I've moved, I need to change my registration. So there's a process that's actually removing people from the rolls if there has been a change of address and you've been unable to verify that they are,
If they're not at that residential address, because that all determines who you can vote for. It determines your ballot
Right.
style and everything. So what happens is, you didn't let me finish, but
yes,
so they're put on inactive list.
okay,
Now, they're on an inactive list for 2 general elections.
okay.
They're still eligible to vote. If they go vote, or if they interact with our office in any manner, they become active. So if they don't vote for 2 general elections, they become ineligible and will have to re-register to vote. We have, if you look on our website, we have about 500,000 registered voters. That doesn't count the 90,000 inactive voters. So when it comes December 31st, there'll probably be 45,000 inactive voters that will become ineligible. That's just a guesstimate. I don't know the exact numbers, but that's over a 4-year period, 2-year period. So they will become ineligible vote. And some of these, and I checked back, and I don't think any of these inactive voters that were on the rolls voted this time. So they probably have moved out of the county, moved somewhere, and not planning on voting here. And so that gets them off our roll. Is it okay?
So I got a follow-up question. Thank you. So let's say that someone graduates college, right, and they move up to Hillsborough County, all right, and they didn't participate or whatever, and so if they register in Hillsborough County, will that automatically remove them from your list? I mean, how much crossover do we have in terms of numbers?
If they're on the inactive list, or if they're active and they go up to Hillsborough County and register, yeah, they'll move them off our list and onto their list. They'll become a Hillsborough County resident. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I understand.
Get a mic.
I was gonna ask, just hearing you say that process makes sense, but in some ways it also disenfranchises voters from, like, when you have, like, pulling people to be inactive, they think that all their status is inactive and that they can't go and vote. It might make them think that, like, basically, like, that they're not able to actually participate.
I don't think we ever notify them that they're inactive.
No.
No. They're not notified they're inactive because they're still eligible voters. So what happens if somebody's inactive and have moved to another county and they go to vote, they can change their address. If they're from county to county in Florida, they can change their address right there at the polls and vote. Mm-hmm. I think, and Paula will attest to this past election, I have never seen so many change of address affirmations that came into the polling locations this time. Thousands, and every one of those come back to our office and has to be processed. And I think we just got finished with those, processing all those.
But they also do get, like, so there's no mailing about the inactive status, but before you remove them from the polls, they get a letter, right, saying,
I don't think we notify them that they become ineligible. No.
Okay.
So another question I was going to ask you is like, do you think automatic voter registration, do you think that's a plausible thing in this county, or do you?
I don't think it's possible. I don't think you'll ever see that in the state of Florida.
Nope.
No. That is writing with fraud. Same-day registration. We have 29 days before the election, so we have a process to go through to vet those people, make sure they are residents of our county, make sure they're not, that they're citizens of the state of Florida. There's a whole process they go through, so that gives us time to process those, and that's why we have the 29-day rule.
So,
And they just say one thing.
Yeah.
As a poll worker, would you want to register voters the same day they come in?
having worked the polls, that probably is putting a lot of burden on people to do that. So yeah, that's a whole other separate conversation.
Yeah, there's a few states that do it. I think there's a few states, but I don't think you'll see it in Florida.
I mean, I was working on the election day, and I think I was helping my assistant clerk do the change of address forms, and we had like, I think 200 or 300. It was a ridiculously high amount. Lots of people too. That's a nice thing too. If you're registered in a different county, we can just call and they pull you over and you get to vote that day, but we still have to fill out the paperwork. So registering voters on the same day, maybe there's a mechanism at like the main election center, but it logistically, that does sound like a lot of work.
You want to get back to the question of what supervisor of elections duties are?
Well, yeah, that's kind of because the next question I had, and kind of based on some of the questions coming back, why did you want to become a supervisor of election? That was my second
That's a question my wife asks me every day. Well, in the beginning, back in 2016, we had, 2012. It was a huge, that's when Obama ran for president, and it was a chaotic election year. People were in line for hours and hours, and the election was called before some of Lee County voters, and not only Lee County, but all over the state, it was called before they even got the vote. So that gave, and then I don't want to bash my predecessor. She just didn't handle the media well. She got some bad rap, and I thought, and then before I got into the race, there was 5 other people running against her. And I came in the race to keep those 5 out. And if I got elected, I knew I could do a good job, and so I was lucky. The voters voted for me, and here I still am, and I'm proud of the job that especially my team. I've got a great team, and I'm proud of what they've done, and some of the changes we made have been really good.
Let me just follow up on that, Tom, because I was there at the beginning, and we were with you. There was so much mess at that time in those elections, and all the community leaders felt this is wrong, change is necessary. And that is when we had the number of people we were saying, they're also doubtful. When you walked in, we had a panel like this, and we said we need somebody mature enough to handle the elections. Thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
Just to show, because one of the first elections I worked was during Ian, when we had to reduce the number of voting locations on election day. I don't think I felt my feet, but we had 10,000 people come through the doors. And the longest time that people were waiting was 30 to 45 minutes, which is really remarkable. So yeah, the logistics, and so I fully encourage if you want to volunteer as a poll worker, do it. It's one of my greatest joys, and it's a lot of hard work.
It's not a volunteer job. You get paid. You get paid a lot of money. I want to talk about that a little bit about the 2022 election when Hurricane Ian. You know, that was a very stressful election for us. We had to decide how we were going to handle it. Luckily, we had a model to follow, and when Hurricane Michael hit the northern panhandle, of course, it's smaller population, but so we, like he said, our 12 voting sites, our 12 early voting sites became election day sites also. So we had 16 days straight voting. And every day I was on media telling people, go vote now, don't wait till election day. We only got 12 sites. If you wait till election day, you're going to stand in line. But I like to vote on election day. I said, well, next election, but not this election. So they waited, and there was lines. I know at 7 o'clock in many locations we had 400 people in line. And by 9 o'clock, they were through. And I was planning on implementing the early voting express vote marking system. I don't know, whoever voted early knows what I'm talking about, the express. I was waiting for an upgrade to the software, but with the Hurricane Ian and what we were going to have to do, I knew this would be more efficient. So we ended up, instead of training 2,000 poll workers, we took the money and bought extra express votes to man 12 sites, and that made that election go. Even though we did have long lines, that made that election more efficient, and we got through it.
Which, by the way, the best day to come vote early is on a Sunday. We're bored, and you don't have a single wait. And when I say bored, we had 1,000, we're slightly below 1,000. Which sounds like a lot. There's actually a question coming in that I'm going to infuse here, because what are the requirements to become a poll worker?
Well, you know, I got a whole list of them here, I think. And first of all, you got to be a registered voter in this county. Read and write and speak English language. And we do have, usually have a bilingual person at every voting site, because we do have a lot of people come in that English is not their first language, so we try to, you know, make sure we can service and have them vote also. Because we are Section 203 by the federal law, we have to have dual language ballots. Everything we do is dual language. Every advertising, every sign has to be in Spanish and English. You are required to have an email address. I tell voters, let me see your phone. If you flip it open, you're not hired. Even though we use a flip phone at the polls for calling in situations that the poll worker needs to talk to at the office. You got to be able to stand for long hours. You got to be able to lift 20 or 30 pounds, and you can't be smoking. Once you go on election day, once you go into that poll, you're not allowed to leave. You have to stay there, and those days are long. Minimum of 12 hours, sometimes 14 to 16 hours. Hopefully, when you close the poll, the modem the results quickly, and you can leave. But we've had situations where the modems failed. They had to be brought into the office, and thank God it wasn't Boca Grande this time, because Boca Grande's a long way away. You got to act nonpartisan. You can't be partisan when you're working an election. So that's a big item there. If you just have to be. We know, whatever the side you lean on, keep it to yourself. And you have to be able to complete online training, and that's about it. Yes, sir.
Hi, I hope you can hear me. I might ask this like 3 different ways, but so I'm about 33 years old, and I'm at the point where like I can prove my identity, to send $1,000, to do almost anything that would be like I would never want someone to impersonate me, and I'm used to it being fast and easy. Do you think we could ever get to that point in the future with voting, where you're proved to be an eligible resident, you're proved to be eligible registered voter, and it's in some way, shape, or form easier than the let's all get to the same building, let's all line up and have this, this party. Do you ever see that happening?
I'm not sure what you're asking me. So, I mean, like voters who aren't
I'm
registered?
in
Voters
my-
who aren't registered?
No,
Or-
let's say I'm a legitimate voter. I'm registered. I'm in my room, election
Oh, you
night,
wanna-
and I
oh,
vote on my
oh,
phone. Could
yeah.
that ever happen?
Well, there's been a lot of studies. A lot of studies by the DOD. They spent millions of dollars, the Department of Defense, because they would like to have this for overseas military. And DOD stopped it. Said that there's no way it could be secure enough. California, there was a group in California who also studied it, and I think it's still under study. I'm not saying it's never going to happen, but what they tell me is the expense of setting up an entire voting platform for online voting is so expensive that, and to make it secure is probably just about out of the question. I know there's several countries that, and they tried online voting and on a municipal local elections in some states, and it didn't work. I know some countries, I know one country, I forget the name, does online voting. I haven't heard a whole lot about fraud on that, but you think it would increase voting? It hasn't increased their voter turnout at all.
That's news to me. In that same vein, if you had a wish list of something that could make your lives easier, processing votes or something like that, and I know you're constrained by tons of statutes, federal and state, but like, if there was something that you could do or ask for or wish list that would make your lives easier or make it better, what would that look like?
No matter what you do, it's not going to be easy when it comes to servicing your jurisdiction. But I have put in wish lists, and not just only me, a group of supervisors of elections have been trying to push, I don't want to call them voting centers, similar to what we did in Hurricane Ian, instead of having, so everybody can vote at any location. Now in Hurricane Ian, we only had 12. If we did vote centers, we'd have to expand those numbers. And the only problem we have there is two problems. We have getting enough sites. We probably need 15 or 20 that we can keep for 16 days, and the habit of the voter, not changing that habit, but it would end on election day. Yeah.
Thank you.
What would a process look like? So, for example, if FGCU wants to become a voting location, what are some of the requirements for that to happen?
Parking is a big requirement. ADA accessible is another requirement, and room size is another requirement.
Okay.
I think, and access, for the public to get to that position. We've talked about putting a voting site on FGCU, but the parking is just outrageous. There's another question over here.
A question I was going to ask, you were talking about more polling locations, which I think is a good thing for me. I think that's,
Early voting sites.
yeah, I think there needs to be more. But I also think there's a concern for lower income people who can't get to polling sites because they don't have cars, for example. How would you address that?
Vote by mail. We have three ways to vote: vote by mail, early vote, or election day. Everybody has an opportunity to vote if they want to vote.
So you're saying you wouldn't even address the problem by having driving people to polling stations, nothing like that?
Not our office, but we do have churches and other groups, League of Women's Voters, and churches that provide that service, and and Lee Tran will also provide that service.
And this year, Uber, I think, offered 50% off if you were driving to the voting location.
The voters do have a responsibility, and then one of their responsibility is to know where your poll is, know your options, and know the conditions and the issues that they're going to vote on.
Okay,
My question is, what would be the consequences of FGCU becoming a poll site for elections in terms of perception from students and the external?
We have a
Population.
polling site just right outside the gate at a church right here, just right outside the gate for a lot of FGCU students do use. I think at one time, I think last election season, there was only like 1,100 eligible voters for Lee County that were in housing here in FGCU. Something like that.
Another question. You mentioned accessibility as something important for polling sites. What would make something accessible or a location accessible?
Well, the parking and where it's located for the drive there. Also accessible for handicap ADA voters that come in with wheelchairs and stuff, that they have the proper ramps, proper sloping, and which most buildings do, but we have to make sure that happens. And if it doesn't, then we can actually bring a ramp out and try to facilitate that. Because we have the ADA community, they're eyeing us all the time. We get reports from them about, after election, we'll have a report from them saying that how good of a job we did or didn't do.
I'm a vote by mail person, and I was very impressed by the whole process. I mean, I've been doing it for a few years, but including being able to see whether your vote, where your vote is in the process and if it's gotten counted. And I wondered whether that's unique to this area or whether that's something that's just as good everywhere in the country.
I can't speak for everywhere in the country, but I mean, in the state of Florida, most of them have on their website where you can follow it. Now, we've started a service called Ballot Tracks. If you're voting by mail, you should sign up for the next election. And Ballot Tracks is actually, we're more proactive. We actually email, text you, however you would like, telling you the same phases of your ballot, that we sent it to you, that we received it, that we counted it. Oh, you forgot to, and we tell you forgot to sign it.
Okay. But
My only comment is, Mr. Doyle, is I'd call your office because the U.S. mail didn't deliver, and I want to say that whenever we called, there was a live person to answer the phone. Thank you.
Well, I know I was talking about the vote by mail requests. I know there was some long wait times for several days, and that's disheartening. But when you got 15 people answering phones, you got 400 people calling in, there is going to be a wait time. Yes, ma'am.
I also had a question. We're just loading you up with those questions.
I love questions.
My question was mainly directed as a college student who voted from mail. I did go home to do so. I think I got it shipped to my home address. But I guess I just don't know enough about how other college mail-in voters go through that process. Does it come to our postage office, like on campus, or?
So if you're on campus and say you live in Tampa or another county outside the county, you should call your supervisor of elections and have your vote by mail mailed to you. You can have. Now, when you do that, you have to send in a signed request to do that, because we just don't, just because you call. Now, if you do call, we will have to verify you by your last four of your social, your Florida driver's license. But to change that mailing address that's not on file will require a signature.
Okay, thank you.
And we waived, the governor waived that during hurricanes. We waived that. We could go ahead and send it to any address you asked for, but now that executive order has expired.
Thank you. Oh, that's weird. So you've mentioned the signature a lot with the vote by mail, and I remember I do early voting now, and part of it is because my husband and I did vote by mail, and he got a thing back saying that his signature didn't match what was on file. His signature does look like a Z from Zorro, so it changes every 5 seconds. But first off, I do appreciate that it was counted, and that you gave him that, or not you personally, but your whole thing.
No, I personally did it.
Oh, perfect, thank you. And you know, let him know, like, you're gonna have to update it, or if it doesn't match next time, there's gonna be a problem. But how often does something like that happen, and is it actually a concern for you guys?
It's a concern if they don't, you know, once that comes in, and the voters, the only persons that can reject a signature is the canvassing board. Canvassing board is made up of supervisor of elections, a county commissioner, and a county judge. And we're the only ones that can reject the signature. But before the canvass board looks at those signatures, the staff has already decided that this signature doesn't match. It goes to another staff member, and if they agree the signature doesn't match, then it goes to the canvassing board. But as soon as my staff says that day that they decided it doesn't match, there's a phone call, text message, and a letter sent out to the voter saying this is how you cure that problem. So by this election, we had just a little bit over 500 mismatched signatures come to the canvassing board. 288 were cured by affidavit, and 66 were sent back by the canvassing board because we decided that it did match. And so we still had another 100 and something that didn't get counted because they didn't cure it.
Can I do a follow-up? For clarification, are you saying canvassing board, or I just want to make sure I'm hearing that correctly?
Canvassing board.
All right, and then you told me who was on that board. Is that an appointed position? Do they run for that? I probably should know this, but I don't. So is there any way you can talk a little bit more about that board?
It's in statute, the supervisor of elections, the chairman of the county commissioner, and the county, and the chair, and the head judge appoints a county judge to be sitting on there.
Thank you so much.
So there was a lot of really good questions from the audience. So I'm going to reduce it to two final questions. One is, and we kind of hinted at this topic, but there's a lot of commotion in this country about the integrity, the security of voting. What are the mechanisms that your office has done to ensure that the voting is done correctly?
Well, I've already mentioned our list maintenance that we do. I think in the odd years, when there's no elections, we do 2 list maintenance programs. We do list maintenance every day, too. We also get reports from the state every week. We get reports from the clerk of the court that because people signing up for, or jury duty is picked through your driver's license, and they come back, their address has changed. So that starts a process, and that's every week. And then also they send us notices of felons. People have been convicted of felons, and also people who've been deemed incapacitated. And those are people who start the process of removal from the rolls.
Okay. And it's kind of related to this, but one thing that I think is a nice thing that Lee County does, and other counties do it as well, but that's the notion of provisional ballots. And hearing that the canvassing board is only 3 people makes me feel very, because we had 750 provisional ballots?
We had 908 provisional ballots.
That's
and 100 I think it was about 170 got accepted.
Okay.
I thought I wrote that down somewhere, but so when the provisional ballots come in, staff members looks at all of those and decides why these people had to do a provisional. They weren't registered. They registered too late. They were non-citizens. They were flagged for a felon conviction. Then people who vote by, say, come in for a provisional but are eligible voters, but they, for some reason, they couldn't be verified, a poll worker error, or they didn't have their ID with them, they vote a provisional ballot. The rule is nobody goes away without voting, even if it's a provisional. So the staff member comes in with 900 packages of provisional ballots. These ballots are sealed in an envelope, never to be opened unless it's accepted. Here is 408 ballots that came in, provisional ballots came in. All 408 never registered to vote. So you can look at all of them, or you can say reject all of them at one time. Most of the time we'll reject them all because we know the staff member has looked at every single one of them. If it's more than one staff member looking at them, then we come up, here's 200. These voters all registered after book closing. Book closing is 29 days before the elections. These are rejected. Here's 170. These voters are all eligible. Their signatures matched, and they should be accepted. So those are all accepted. Those are the only ones that are opened up and tabulated. The rest of them are never opened, put away, and stored for 22 months.
So I guess I will end it by asking what is the question I didn't ask? What is something you want people in the audience today to know?
Well, I think there's two things. Trust the system. And the only way this works, and when I tell people, sometimes they gasp, but the only way this system is, you got to have confidence in the system, and we all have to accept loss. If you don't do it, you'll never have, that's what you have to do. And I wish people would see that every jurisdiction in Florida and outside, I know election workers outside of Florida, their whole goal is to have a clean, accurate, and secure election. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So I really appreciate, because I was, of course, on campus throughout the election cycle working with the League of Women Voters as part of our voters' rights mission, and made innumerable calls down to the supervisor of election. They are so helpful in walking through that process as we work to take down some of the barriers to students and really turn a page on giving the students who are here in our community the opportunity to exercise their right to vote in a way that works for them. And I know that we identified for one thing, hopefully by the time next election cycle rolls around, that we can improve the Eagle ID and get a signature on that, because I know that has been some confusion at the polls. Looking to an accurate driver's license is maybe too high of a bar for a signature. And then secondly of all, when we have the students who are coming onto campus through the Eagle orientation, having those services could be a real opportunity for students coming into our community to be able to get registered to vote, get some clear answers about the getting a Florida ID or a driver's license to help them meet that bar. And I would just like to say that I'm so happy to see you here, because I think there's a lot of work to be done to welcome those voters into our community.
Well, leading up to the next election season, I mean, anytime Jan wants a registration table here, we can make that happen. And if you have an event, any kind of event, job fair, and request one, and we'll send a team out, and they will register you to vote and educate the voters on 3 ways of voting.
Yes, so nice to hear you.
Thank you.
Particularly that point you talked about trust.
Yes.
And over the last few elections, there has been a lot of issues about elections are rigged all over the country, not talk about Lee County. Whether presidency or state or whatever, doesn't matter. But there have been statements like that. And they create fear or lack of trust of the system. So how much, as a supervisor of elections over the country, not just Lee County, can you talk to say, no, they are elections. We try, there could be mistakes, human mistakes.
Yeah.
But can we really genuinely say, no, we don't leak elections?
Yeah. I mean, there's always a minute amount of fraud, and you can't help that. But normally, fraud is a mistake by the voter or a mistake by an election worker, and I think and I say that every time I talk about fraud in elections. Yeah, well, you know, it's the national news media and people sending out misinformation. You know, I don't want to go back and talk about 2016 or 2020 and talk about all the misinformation that came out, because, you know, it's a lot of misinformation.
What an excellent way to end this conversation. So let's give
Except
a
for
round
what
of
I
applause.
said.
And we're only delayed because we got great questions from it. So let's bring Liberty front, Ron.
You want me to get stepped down?
If you want.
No.
If-
Thank you, guys.
And Peter, do you want to do you want to speak more about Socrates Cafe since Max isn't here? Yeah, sure. And so, you know, we shared some data. We heard about how elections are run. The takeaway point is really what these folks here on my right side are going to share with you, and that is how do we move forward. So I'm going to let each of them share some thoughts with you. And again, if there's questions, you can submit them electronically, and I will weave them in.
All right, well, hello everyone. My name is Liberty Barber. I'm a communications major, and I'm also studying religious studies as a minor. And post-election, it's been a really interesting adventure as a first-time voter, long-time American, seeing the reactions. And I think the question of, okay, where do we go from here? I think that's a really good question. Specifically from a college student standpoint, I would say talking, conversation, discourse. One thing I'm taking a religion and politics in America class, which has been really cool. We've gotten to talk about a lot of really interesting topics, specifics about American politics and religion. And as one of our requirements, we had to participate in a group challenge called Unify America. So basically, according to their mission statement, their goal is to bring Americans together with an interactive experience that can help people strengthen their civic engagement muscles and work together tackling challenges. And specifically the Unify America Challenge, basically what we did is we signed up for a date and a time, and on that date and time we were provided with a Zoom call link, which we would click, and it would match us up after we filled out a couple of demographic questions. Where do you stand politically? Things like that. And they would match us someone who was the exact opposite of our viewpoint. So if you put, oh, I'm a diehard Democrat, they'd match you with the diehard Republican. And it was structured with guided questions to help us answer some difficult questions. And it was less about what you truly believed, and it was more about how can you talk to someone who doesn't agree with you? How can you talk to someone who has nothing in common with you from a standpoint? I know especially in college, it's funny because after the election happened, I kind of came into the election with the mindset of, well, whatever happens, like I'm a Christian, so I believe it's in God's hands. I think, well, I have friends who are on both sides of the political spectrum. I'm sure we can all get along, regardless of whoever wins. And I felt very comfortable until I got on Instagram and saw a lot of interesting things from my closest friends on both sides of the spectrum. So an experience called Unify America, where we're trying to find unity in not just a divided country, but in a really specifically divided time, is very anxiety-inducing for a lot of people, I can imagine. And I consider myself to be pretty extroverted. I like talking, but it was definitely a bit of a struggle. But the conversation went so well. The person I was paired up with, we had some differences, we had some similarities, but even the things that we disagreed on, we both came into it with the expectation of, all right, well, I'm going to be respectful if you're respectful. And we both were. And it was a really fruitful time. And because you know signing up what kind of experience you're meant to have, I believe that that's what helps drive the respect, is the intentionality and knowing, okay, this isn't a debate, this isn't a fight, we're just gonna talk. And we don't have to agree, but we have to treat each other with respect because in an hour and a half, the Zoom call shuts off. So that was my first experience. And then another experience I got to have in my religion and politics class, we called it the What Now Civil Discourse Forum. And basically what that was, our goal was much like Unify Americas. We were not trying to debate or argue with each other, but to narrow the divide through peaceful but intriguing conversation. I got to MC one of the nights of the event, and my peers facilitated discussions at each table after prompting discussion questions. And we had around 30 students each night, which I think is a fantastic number with the political climate being as hot as it is. And contrary to what a lot of us, even in the class, expected, I observed an unexpected willingness to actually learn and listen and respond openly despite all the different viewpoints. We had plenty of different viewpoints, and we had Kahoots and we had Slido, which is basically an anonymous question asking, answering source or media. And one of the questions that we asked was, what next steps should we at FGCU take to facilitate more civil discussions on sensitive topics? And I was really hoping for something good after such a, not just a difficult season, but a really engaging night where people were really willing to talk openly about various topics. And some of my favorites are, have world issues displayed by facts and real footage and let the student form their own opinions. Create smaller topics with a bigger perspective. And my personal favorite, given by 12 separate students on only one night, was have more events like this. We need this. And despite all that initial hesitance, I really did see a strong desire for unity. And I think that more people want it than we would expect. And I think that with more conversations, that's how we get there.
Very good job. It's a tough act to follow. I actually, I hear, is it on?
I'm trying to figure which mic is on.
I think it is, yeah, okay. I think I was invited here because I've been a participant in the Socrates Cafe, which is something that Peter has been instrumental in putting together. But my purpose for getting involved with that is, like all of us here, I've been bombarded with misinformation, very difficult to tell what's truth and what isn't. We all live in our own cocoons, and in fact, the way things like YouTube and social media is designed, it reinforces whatever beliefs we already have. And so the Socrates Cafe, to me, was an opportunity to expose myself to how other people think in a non-judgmental environment. And so each of these meetings, there's a different topic, and anyone is invited to attend. Contact Peter if you'd like to know more about it. But at each meeting, there's a topic, and we just really go around the room, and each person has an opportunity to express themselves without anybody arguing with them or trying to change their mind. And from the very first meeting that I went to, I found it, life-changing, seriously, because again, living in my world, which is a lot different from most, everyone else's world, I had no idea how other people were looking at the very same issues that I was looking at. And it drastically changed how I perceived everything that was going on. So it's been a great experience for me. And I know, Peter, you feel the same way. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, true. But let me first of all say, Liberty, I'm just so proud of you. Liberty was my student, and we had all these conversations in the colloquium class, and just so proud that I see some other of us students here, and one, of course. This is a bit touching for me. Let me just say this. At the beginning of this year, Mark Liga, who was the provost that time, asked me to, could you try this, start this dialogue, because we realized the elections were creating something, and it's good, it's healthy conversations to have differences in opinions, but it's not healthy for us to be enemies just because we disagree. So let's just get together, let's just talk. In fact, if you listen, you will probably learn something from the other person, because quite often, as Ron mentioned, we just believe we are right. Everybody is right. I am the one who is right. And there's actually hatred. Everybody who says something here or there is racist. And not realizing maybe even me, I'm making some statements which could be interpreted as racist by the other party. So there's room for us to have that conversation. And that's what we have been doing. We have had topics like what makes America America, topics from education, what is our education which is of value. Things like today we just had a topic on which way forward, which was actually started way before the elections, because there was going to be change anyway. So how do we go, whether it was the woman or the gentleman, whoever won, doesn't matter. And we've been trying to push that needle, but let me just get to the point here. It's sad. I take credit, Jan and I, we all do these things together and we try to push and listen to each other. But I'm sitting here tonight as a victim, and you see it was in Wink News a few minutes ago, there, as a victim of a house I'm building in Cape Coral. There was so much. The people who came into that house destroyed it so badly, and we read stuff, and everything was F you nigger, or something like that, all over. And I was very sad by not just the loss is bad, really, but that there are people we still have with that mindset. Whether it is political, whether it's just people who probably hate me for whatever reason, which I don't, or whether it's just people who hate my color of my skin or whatever it is, that doesn't matter. But to have those kind of people is what you're saying. And it's very depressing. But I was telling Ron and other people, Dr. Kuija, thank you for being here. They don't dampen our spirit. We still have a cause to believe that we can sit together, regardless of who we are, and still say love is better than hate. Differences in opinions and political ideologies is good, is healthy. That's part of democracy. But that does not mean we become enemies. We're good together. That I can sit here with my students. We love one another. We share different opinions. And it's good. So on Saturday, actually, in the afternoon, we will go to that house, fix it up, clean it up together with a number of people and say, yes, we don't start for this. We start for something much better. And you're welcome. So there'll be a flyer going on. Rosario, where's Rosario? She'll be up there. You're welcome to come. Help us in the cleaning. The news will be there. It's just to say, we start for this. We start for something better. We can discuss it, and in January we'll have another Socrates Cafe, led by students, by a community, by all of us. We come together to say, it's okay to have difference in politics. It's okay to be different religions. It's okay to have different sexual orientation. It's okay. But it's not okay to hate one another. It's not okay to disrespect one another because they are different. And that's the message we are sending. You're sitting in the news tonight. The pictures are horrifying, even to see them there in my house. Today, I'm talking about tonight. From 5 o'clock when we started here. That was the news, we saw it when we were walking in. It's depressing, but does not dampen who we are. We cannot give up. It's just another cause to say, Masha, we have to move on. We have to keep up because we got a better message than them. We cannot let them win. Thank you.
Somebody submitted in the Q&A, the next Unify America College Bowl will be held from February 25th to March 12th. Just register you or your class on the website and pick a date. I might sign up my social programs class in the spring. Sounds like a very... Huh?
You definitely should. It's a great experience. If you guys know anyone, whether you're a college student yourself and you just haven't done it, I would definitely recommend it. My specific experience was a little bit different from other people's. Like the person that I was paired with, we really did have a lot in common. Not everything, but even though we had a lot of the same values, we still had different areas where we could come to a conclusion, you know, and then other people in my class were paired with people who they believe the other person's belief is like a despicable thing, but you know what, they were able to come together and have a civil discussion, and I think that's really important for all people to be able to do.
So, any last minute thoughts that you want to share with the audience? Any last minute questions?
There's somebody.
There's some in the back.
You can take a picture. Yeah, please.
So in a country that seems like it thrives off conflict, and like it kind of depends on who we vote for. What do y'all think it takes for people to see beyond the outside of who they are and more the inside, so we can start actually talking about things that matter and voting for like people that we don't actually just see on the media all the time, like Trump or Kamala, or like, you know, back in the day, Bush and like Reagan and like Obama. Like, why don't we ever? What do you think it has to take for people to actually see on the inside and see that, like, voting for other parties, and like the lady in the Green Party, I forgot her name. She seemed like she was talking about a couple of good things. What do y'all think it takes for somebody to like vote for them?
Are you more so asking how can you gain an understanding with someone who voted differently than you? Just like to clarify.
No, not really.
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of respond, but I did ask this other question. But no, like you were saying, like going back to like when I see this past election, I see elections that happened before I was born, right? And I see the same issues and the same candidates being pushed and torn down, and the same problems persisting. And then like as far as ways of addressing it, I think we're all going through the same thing again, honestly. I think we're being distracted for the most part. I think the way of addressing it is on individual levels, groups like this, exercises like you mentioned. I know for me personally that what I keep coming across is that, especially for the younger generation, and I include myself in that, we tend to live in a digital world and a physical world, and honestly it seems like the digital world is becoming more important to most people. And so we're meeting these people in the physical world, but we have all these preconceptions of a digital world. They say a word of a video that I saw that explained the whole concept, but when I talk to that person about it, it actually doesn't apply to them until I understand their perspective and understand, oh, you know what, that has nothing to do with you. No, I can see why you voted that way. No, I can see why you have those tendencies. But for me personally, it's just giving that person room, space to talk, giving them the time for me to not prejudge them on whatever I might have learned about what they're voting for, what they're interested in, and then also just an appreciation. Like honestly, my family left a war-torn country to come to the United States, and when I'm here, and I've been overseas a few times, I see, yeah, like we kind of got it figured out as far as considering how humans are and our tendencies towards violence, right, and things of the past. Like, it's pretty awesome here, and there's no appreciation for it. Like, people don't just appreciate the fact that we've got water, we've got food, we've got houses, we've got amazing public facilities that we get to share. And instead we're pushed and focused on these. They are problems, they are significant problems, and they do persist, but overall we have it good. And it's like, for me, it's giving people time and trying to understand them, but also showing appreciation for what we do have, because we can get lost in individual instances of things that are unfortunate, but when you put it in the contrast of what we actually do have as a whole, I think it makes it easier to bear, and it doesn't become a consuming thing. So I'm not sure if that addresses it entirely, but that's the way that I see it, as how I try to interact with people, and I think on the grand scale maybe helps in that regard.
Let me add something to what you just said. I think there are some areas, if I got you right, there are some things we still have to agree on. We need clean water, we need roads, we need schools, we need hospitals. It doesn't matter what your political is, or the environment, Richard and everybody else. The environment, a good environment. We can vote in whichever way. In fact, in Socrates Cafe, we don't even want you to agree with me. But to give me a chance to talk. You might just get something. Just listen to me. I have tried, and let me get this, to try to understand the issues, the results of the elections, try to make sense out of it. They talk to so many people with different viewpoints, and sure enough, there's something to learn either way. There's somebody who will teach you something. There's always room for learning. And we all be together. People will be, let's get this clear, people will be angry because we lost. We campaigned. You campaigned for 2 years or 3 years. You wasted so much money, so much time. It pains if you lose. People will be happy and excited. We won. We beat them. But still, in our joy and in our pain, there's no room for us to become permanent enemies. We need healing moments. And these are kind of sessions like this. We all come together to say we still belong to this country. Regardless. And it's a beautiful country. We all came from. It's beautiful.
So I was going to talk about what he was talking about, why no other candidates really get a say is mostly because our country doesn't have ranked choice voting, which is something that we need. Because basically the two political parties have say over anything else. And another way you would address that is like, basically like people feel like they're pushed because they're like in America, for example, culture issues drive everybody. And people actually don't know what so like for example, this election alone, 80%, they polled 80%, basically 80% of America believes with Kamala's policies, for example, and only 20% actually believe in Trump's policies. But it's the way that our culture is the cultural issues drive our politics right now, and policy does not. And that's the problem with America in general, is people can't pay attention to the policy that is driving our nation. And that's what we really need to reckon, because if we don't reckon with the fact that policy is over anything else, it is way more important than these cultural issues that are literally driving us into oblivion.
Agreed.
I would like to back this, what you just mentioned, and I would follow with that question. I would say it is idealistic to have that common agreement that yes, we disagree, but we don't have to be permanent enemies. But when we consider that this doesn't address the biases that we have against each other, and those biases, when it comes to policies, they're going to be translated or converted into policies that are going to affect our lives. So what are the limits of this agreement?
Yeah, that's honestly one of the biggest questions, like not only that I've heard, but that I have myself. Because 100%, like the opinions that we have and the beliefs that we hold, whether they're good beliefs or inherently horrible beliefs that are oppressive, which is why I think that, not to take it back to it, but that discourse is such an important thing, because at the end of the day, like everyone who has a belief, whether that's a correct belief or an incorrect belief or somewhere in the middle, everyone has a reason for what they believe, whether it's their parents taught them that ideology, or they found it on the internet, or it comes from a system of something either good or either bad, or their religious beliefs. And that's why I would say the discourse is so important, and not just like, oh, do Unify America, or join a class, join a forum. Talk to your friends is more of what I'm saying. Find people who you disagree with and speak with them, because I feel like whatever side of the spectrum you are, if you don't have conversations, I completely agree. Like, the beliefs that you have are going to, as politicians, leak into policy, no matter where you're at on the spectrum. And that can either be a good thing that inspires, good virtue, or it can be a bad thing that inspires oppression. And that is a huge topic to tackle in just one night. But I would say that the best thing that you can do as an individual is talk and converse, because like I said, like everyone has a reason. And when you're able to find out what the reasoning is, that's when the real issues can be addressed.
I think that's perfect.
Jan,
You're first.
Jan, 1 minute. I just wanted to add, Liberty from Origin, and address that question briefly. We quite often dismiss some issues as idealistic, and that's the way the society operates, like that mindset. But think about it. Hate is a very heavy feeling. Love, which we bet towards idealism as love, is much easier. Just love me. I'm lovable. Yeah, I'm a good guy. Just look for me for my love. It's just so easy. But when you try to hate me for what? I didn't do anything to my color. What did we? So we can learn away and say no. It's not idealistic to love one another. It's just the way we should be. And actually for the majority of the people, you don't meet somebody and say, I don't like you, I don't like you. No. Quite often we embrace one another, and we can continue with that. And don't say it, and don't dismiss it as if it's just idealistic. No, it's not. It can be. Yes, truthfully, it might be looking for too far, but we are better loving one another than hating one another. However much other people see it. Love is still easier than hate.
All right, that's a perfect. So thank you for coming. We will have events in the spring, probably dealing with substance abuse, if it should be a criminal justice or a public health issue, and on the role of AI. Is it going to be a doom and gloom picture, or is it going to be AI as a savior?
Jan, and the next Socrates Cafe is on January 24th at 3 p.m. We will send a flyer, and we'd like all of you to come.